Good evening, I'm Willard Cheng, sitting in for Pinky Webb. Tonight, we ask the questions, we tackle the issues, we clarify matters, and we get on point. The government's infrastructure projects under fire for alleged irregularities. This time, lawmakers are accused of receiving kickbacks. A House panel vows to look into the issue. Let's get on point with House Committee on Public Accounts Chairperson and Bicol Saro Party List Representative Terry Ridon. Good evening and nice to see you again, Kong Terry.
Thank you for having me, Willard.
All right. Sir, first of all, what triggered your committee to look into the issue?
Well, I think the presidential pronouncement of the president that he would want to see an all-seeking infrastructure review of all projects in his term is something that the House treats seriously. And secondly, House Speaker Martin Romualdez also made a response to the President's SONA that he will actually order this particular review through the House. And as soon as I was elected as House Public Accounts Committee Chairperson, the marching order for us is basically to convene the Public Works Department, regional directors, high-level officials, including the Secretary, for them to provide a report to the committee on the status of infrastructure projects, particularly flood control projects.
Particularly flood control. How about the rest, sir, outside flood control?
Well, of course, as it is an all-encompassing inquiry, it includes all other infrastructure projects, but with special emphasis on flood control, because it is that particular concern which the President raised during the State of the Nation address.
Kung Terry, titingnan din ho ba ng komite yung mga sinasabi ng Pangulo na nag-conspire para pagkakitaan itong mga flood control projects?
Well, magiging methodical yung gagawin pong pagsisiyasat ng atin pong komite. Siyempre, una, kailangan nating malaman yung mga proyektong ito, flood control man ito o hindi, ay talaga bang may necessity para rito. So, ibig sabihin, pagka hindi pala siya necessary na proyekto, bakit ito itinuloy? No? Second of all, we will address also the concern relating to overpricing, the concern relating to ghost projects, and the concern relating to yung sinasabi ho ng Pangulo na meron daw pong mga kickbacks. So, ibig sabihin, we should be able to identify sino yung nagbibigay ng kickbacks, sino po yung tumatanggap ng kickbacks. So, in a particular situation, for example, in these infrastructure projects, pwede mangyari na yung kontratista yung nagbibigay ng kickbacks, ang kumukuha yung pong agency officials, at katulad po ng binabanggit ng Pangulo, baka meron po mga legislators na kumukuha po ng mga kickbacks. So, in the course of the inquiry, I'm quite certain meron po tayong matitiso dito ng mga dokumento, meron po tayong matitiso dito na whistleblowing na magaganap dito po sa mga iba't ibang mga proyekto ng infrastruktura.
This early, sir, meron na ka na bang potential pieces of evidence o kailangan pa bang hintayin ng review ng COA?
Well, hindi naman. Tingin ko, kaya naman po nga mag-proceed ng House Committee on public accounts, no? Dito po sa review po ng performance ng ating pong infrastructure agencies. Yung Senado, ang aking pong pagkakaalam, ay magkakaroon din po ng sarili po nilang investigasyon irrespective of how COA will proceed. No? Kasi, syempre yung COA po, I think they have to wait for the end of the fiscal year, no? Bago sila magkaroon ng annual report. No? So, it's something that the House can actually undertake in the soonest time.
And anong approach ang iti-take ng committee, Kong? Do you see the committee doing ocular inspections as well?
Well, kasama po ito. And I think to be very fair to the Public Works Department, particularly on flood control, meron naman ho tayong mga nakikita din sa totoo lang na mga gumagana pong mga flood control projects. No? So, magandang halimbawa dito, yung pong syudad ng Marikina. Actually, mga kababayan ho natin doon, akala nila nung pumalo po ng 18.8 meters yung baha last week sa Marikina River, akala nila they have to be forced to evacuate. But they were not evacuated kasi hindi ho tumaas yung tubig. So, I'm quite certain it is also because of the flood control systems working at that time. No? So, very important din po na makahalo tayo ng aral dun sa mga magagandang halimbawa ng mga aktual na proyektong gumana.
At ano ho ba yung mga hindi gumana? Kasi I understand, pinamunuan nyo rin po ang isang grupo, no, Infrastructure Watch, na binabantayan nyo po yung mga ganitong klaseng mga proyekto. What usually goes wrong in these kinds of projects?
Well, siyempre, alam po ninyo sa bawat bahagi po ng proseso po ng project cycle po ng infrastructure projects, marami mga pwede na mangyari dyan. So, at the very least, doon po sa mga procurement process pa lang po. Nakikita na rin ho natin dyan yung mga, firstly, mga rig bidding, yung mga dinidisqualified na mga qualified bidders, sole bidders, no? At iba pa hong, at saka yung mga deviations from the original project design and project proposal, no? So, yan po yung mga kailangan ho natin makita doon sa mga pinakamalalaki na mga proyekto pong mga naikakasa.
Nakikita niyo ho ba na magiging matagal itong course ng inyong pagdinig dahil mukhang marami-rami po yung mga flood control projects na kailangan busisiin?
Well, syempre, and I would state it first in this program, think of very important, for example, na makita natin yung listahan, sino ba yung mga pinakamalalaking mga kontratista sa bansa. Kumusta ho yung mga naging mga implementation po nila ng mga proyekto. Kasi syempre, I think hindi ka naman magiging malaking kontratista, una kung hindi ka magaling. Ibig sabihin, kaya mo magpatupad ng mga proyekto. No? So, kung for example, makita natin na yung mga pinakamalalaking kontratista, hindi ko sinasabi, I don't want to prejudge it, pero halimbawa, parang hindi pala nila kaya makapag-deliver on time, or for example, mag-deliver man sila on time, pero parang substandard naman pala yung pong kanilang dineliver, or at the very worst, ghost, no? Katulad ng allegation po ng iba. I think kailangan ho talaga nating, we have to make them accountable basically.
And do you see your committee blacklisting certain contractors in the end?
Well, I think we have to be able to recommend a blacklisting of contractors pag ganyan ho talaga yung actual performance po na. But very important din po talaga na hindi na kasi contractors po ito. If it's if what the president is if what the president wants talaga is to make accountable each and every person involved dun sa tinatawag niya na kickbacks and SOPs, kailangan ho talaga natin makita at mapangalanan kung sino ba itong mga to.
Yes, and your committee is expected to name names. Ano
well, kasama ho dito po, syempre, pagka ho yung corruption aspect na po kasi, papasok na po yung House Committee on Good Governance kasi sila po yung basically sa mga usapin po ng corruption issues, sila na po yung may mandato po rito.
Paano po kung may mga lumutang na involved ang ilang lawmakers, lalo na following the statement of Baguio City Mayor Benjamin Magalong claiming that lawmakers received cuts or kickbacks from flood control projects. Your thoughts?
Ang commitment naman ho natin kung saan ho dapat bumagsak po yung acts. No? So usapin po na ito, legislator ba ito? High-level executive official po ba ito? Kontratista po ba ito? Regional director ba ito? Undersecretary ba ito? District engineer po ba ito? Tingin ko wala naman ho dapat santuhin yung pong ganito pong mga inquiries. Kasi syempre, ang pinag-usapan pa rin ho talaga natin dito, pondo ng bayan.
Will you invite the mayor to your hearings?
Of course. Talagang very much welcome po si Mayor Magalong kasi nga, ang panawagan ho talaga natin sa kanya, dapat magpangalan po siya. Nung pong mga kongresista at sino man hong legislator na sinasabi niya pong nakakakuha ng 30%, 40% kickback no, mula po sa mga infrastructure projects. At saka, I think very apt yung pong committee itself. No? Kasi syempre, masasubject din po natin yung mga sinasabi niya to actual scrutiny. No? So, para talaga hong mapanindigan po natin, yung mga binabanggit po natin na talaga meron pong kumikita mula po sa mga infrastructure projects.
Yeah. And how soon can the committee begin its probe, sir?
Well, as soon as the organizational meetings of the various committees that might be involved in this is finished, talaga magsasimula na po yung inquiries po natin relating to the review of infrastructure projects.
So sa panig ng Kongreso, kung mag-iimbestiga ang House and Senate, sa panig naman na executive, sino po sa tingin ninyo ang dapat mamuno sa investigasyon?
Well, I think yung binabanggit ng Pangulo ay yung DPWH will conduct their own internal review. No? Pero I'm also sensing na I think maging involved din po yung iba pang mga high-level offices like yung DepDev dito po sa ongoing review ng executive over the project. So, all of these things are very much welcome. I'm quite certain meron pong pagkakaiba on how they will approach their respective inquiries. Pero gagalangin natin kung ano man yung findings ng iba't ibang mga opisina dito sa bagay po na ito.
And isasama rin ho ba ng komite yung mga flood control projects that were subject of the controversial insertions of the Senate President as reported here on BNC?
I think lahat po ng mga dapat pong makita, no? Whether insertions po yan from the level of Congress, whether insertions po yan from the level of the Senate. Particularly, syempre, like what I stated, the inquiry will be very methodical. Sabi ko nga, the first question to them is, was this necessary? Yun yung kailangan nung sagutin po ng Public Works Department. Ibig sabihin, irrespective of whether it's an insertion or a regular allocation, yung first question that needs to be answered is it a necessary project? Is it a necessary appropriation of government? Kasi pag ang sagot doon ay hindi, para may problema tayo agad.
At kung may mga duplication bang nangyari, ano, makikita din dyan.
Well, kasi real concern, for example, yung, particularly for flood control, no? Mas maganda ba halimbawa na meron kang massive flood control project to make sure na may scale, na abutin po yung proyekto? O mas maganda ba na mas marami pero mas konti? No? So, yan yung mga kailangan sagutin ng mga engineers po natin as soon as the inquiry begins.
Oo. At sisilipin niyo ho ba kung meron ba talagang master plan at nasusunod ba ito?
Well, to be very fair po to DPWH, yung po mga river basins po natin sa buong Pilipinas, meron po yung kanilang mga master plan. At hindi lang ho gobyerno ng Pilipinas ang gumawa nito, kasama ho natin yung mga foreign consultants katulad ng JICA. So syempre, pagka nakita ho natin, basically yun po yung baseline, baseline na pagbabatayan po natin kung nasunod ba o hindi. Ibig sabihin, tama ba yung mga proyekto na inilatag natin sa taon-taon natin mga plano? Nakabatay ba ito sa master plan? Kasi kung hindi, yun nga, ba't natin yung ginawa? Di ba pinag-aaralan natin, kaya nga tayo merong master plan?
And finally, sir, ano ang in-expect ninyong output after the probe? Maybe a proposed legislation?
Well, to be very clear, syempre yung accountability, almost certain ho tayo na we will have to exact accountability for involved parties. No? Yun yung first outcome. Pero secondly, syempre moving forward, what should we do? Hindi ba? So, kung may mga, for example, yung mga minor delays, dapat meron po actual catch-up plan na pwede pong mangyari. No? Tapos pangatlo, yung blacklisting, for example, ng mga involved contractors. Kung talagang mapatunayan ho in the course of the hearing na talagang matindi yung slippage, matindi ho talaga yung kanilang mga default, no? Kailangan ho, matanggal na ho sila sa listahan, gaano man sila kalaking kontratista ng gobyerno.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Congressman Terry Ridon. We'll take a short break, and when we return, we'll speak with Tindig Pilipinas co-convenor Francis Aquino Dee about the Supreme Court's ruling that blocked the impeachment trial against Vice President Sara Duterte. Stay tuned. This is On Point. Welcome back. Criticisms hound the Supreme Court's decision to declare the impeachment articles against Vice President Sara Duterte as unconstitutional. Several groups have filed a motion for reconsideration, arguing the ruling sets a dangerous precedent. Let's get on point with Tindig Pilipinas co-convenor Francis Aquino Dee. Good evening, Kiko, and nice to talk to you again.
Hi, Willard. Good evening, and thank you for having me today. Good evening to everyone listening to us tonight.
First of all, Kiko, did you expect the ruling of the Supreme Court declaring as unconstitutional the articles of impeachment?
I think we were preparing po for the possibility, no? And while, in fact, last week, when the complainant sort of caught wind that when the Supreme Court first took notice of the case and started requesting information from the House of Representatives, we already thought that this was a bit unusual kasi nga, our understanding is that the legislature is supposed to be supreme when it comes to impeachment. No? So I think already when that happened, we started talking about, what if they find in favor of dismissing the complaint. So we filed a motion to intervene. We at that point were not parties to the case, but we filed a motion to intervene last Friday, during the last day of the rains. Parang tumawid pa ako sa baha just to be able to file a motion to intervene. And then that happened just a few hours, I think, before the Supreme Court decision was released. And then again, we talked again among the complainants, is there anything still that we can do? Because we really feel that the decision has negative impacts. So the lawyers we consulted mentioned that we can file ad cautelam a motion for reconsideration just to make sure that all of the arguments that we've actually been seeing online discussed, that there were certain facts of the proceedings that happened in the House that the Supreme Court didn't take note of. We want to make sure that all of that is considered as the Supreme Court looks at the decision again.
Mm-hmm. And please walk us through your group's motion for reconsideration. In a nutshell, tell us, Kiko, why should the Supreme Court reconsider its decision?
Well, basically, so the legal point siguro, I'll have to refer you to our lawyers to explain the nitty-gritty po. No? But the basic idea po is yung sinasabing due process kasi. our understanding of due process is that due process is a trial and a verdict, no? And the only body that can actually hold a trial and issue a verdict in cases of impeachment is the Senate, no? So it doesn't make sense to argue that due process was violated when due process wasn't given an opportunity to start, no? Given that the Senate impeachment proceedings never began. So I think that's one of the arguments raised. And then another one siguro is that I think the Supreme Court sort of interpreted the House's action on what's called the fourth impeachment complaint as an act of discretion. Parang pinili ng House na mag-focus dito sa fourth impeachment complaint rather than the initial three. But our understanding po is the only time that impeachment proceedings begin, this is the old jurisprudence, the only time that impeachment proceedings begin is when the House as a plenary acts on something. So yung first three impeachment complaints, kasama po yung complaint na final namin, none of these were acted upon, none of these represented an initiation of the impeachment proceedings. Because the House as a plenary did not act on them. Only one or two congressmen, representatives endorsed the complaints. No? The only time the House acted as a plenary was when 1/3 or more than 1/3 of all members of the House endorsed an impeachment complaint. And in the Constitution, it's clear, pag nangyayari yun, elevate na yun sa Senate. No? So the House was merely, our understanding is that the House was merely, was compelled to act by this fourth complaint. And so yung nangyari, it doesn't make sense to think of our first ones as sort of effectively dismissed kasi the only ones that the House initiated was the fourth. And siguro the last point to make na lang po is just one of parang justice po, no? So parang kaming mga nag-file ng unang impeachment complaint, right? Parang lumalabas na yung mismong complaint namin yung ginagamit na excuse para i-dismiss yung impeachment proceedings kay VP Sara na napaka-contradictory naman, no? Parang we as citizens used the power that was given to us in the Constitution para masimula yung impeachment complaints na to. And due to no fault of our own, parang hindi nabibigyan ng pagkakataon na madinig yung kaso namin in the proper forum, which is the Senate. So, we're hoping that the Supreme Court considers this again because if the current interpretation of the Supreme Court stands, parang hindi ko na may imagine na kakayanin naming kahit sinong mamamayan na mag-file ng impeachment complaint, even if we feel that there are very, very credible grounds to do so.
And do you share that concern, Kiko? Kasi may mga nagsasabi na the ruling might be used to shut down future impeachment complaints against accountable public officials.
Yes po. So, again, parang maraming nagsasabi na nung panahon ni PGMA po, no? Ang strategy niya ay may tao na magfa-file ng impeachment complaint. Medyo malabnaw, medyo mahina. Tapos a-actionan yun ng Justice Committee na medyo hawak din niya. And then they throw out the complaint and then medyo mag-activate na yung 1-year bar. So ngayon, parang lalong bibilis yung activation of the 1-year bar. It's not when the House Committee acts on it. It's when effectively it's the moment na tinanggap ito ng House Secretary General, parang initiation na pala yun, di ba? So any person, kumbaga parang magiging unahan niyan ng pag-file right? And that doesn't seem like, parang first come, first serve does not seem like the best approach towards accountability po. No? So again, aaminin ko naman po na hindi naman po ako abogado, hindi naman po ako eksperto dito, pero I do share in those fears na parang sobrang butas ng karayom na ngayon kailangang daanan para mapanagot yung mga opisyalis natin. Parang lalong they made it even narrower. They made the path towards accountability even narrower. This decision is what it feels like po.
And how confident or how hopeful are you that the Supreme Court will reverse its decision given that the 13 justices who participated in the deliberations were unanimous?
Well, again, we're holding on to that point nga po that there were certain facts that the decision did not take into consideration, that the specific order that the House did things na nauna yung action sa fourth complaint with the 1/3 endorsees and then the archiving followed. So it's not really consistent with the interpretation na na-dismiss siya. We're hoping that the Supreme Court gives us a chance, or gives at least all parties a chance to present those points. No? And sana yun po, parang we agree that it's somewhat unusual na a case of this magnitude, parang walang hearings, walang oral arguments, they didn't ask for the side of the, they didn't ask the counsel for the House or the Senate to present their cases. So sana ano po, given yun nga, I think nagigets naman po ng ating justices that this is a very this decision has a lot of downstream effects. So this is really going to be a landmark case. So our hope is that, as the Supreme Court always has, that they give this an issue like this the appropriate amount of attention, time, and focus.
In closing, Kiko, what's your message to the Senate Impeachment Court, given that the Senate is expected to tackle the Supreme Court decision next week, and there are reports na there are already 20 senators who are in favor of deferring to the ruling, even if your group has already filed a motion for reconsideration, or even if there's a pending MR?
Well, siguro 2 points po. No? So the first is, ayun nga, kung meron nga pong pending MR, hindi pa sarado yung usapan sa Supreme Court. No? So kung yung alleged na 19 or 20 na senators na yun are thinking na, well, nag-decision yung Supreme Court, therefore, susunod na lang. Yun nga po, may motion for reconsideration. Sana let's wait for the Supreme Court to have a final decision before doing that action. And siguro po, the other thing I'd like to note is yun, we've heard strong statements from people like, not to be self-serving, pero si Senator Bam Aquino, we also heard from Senator Lisa Ontiveros, Kiko Pangilinan, and even from people less associated with our side of the opposition, like si Senator Tito Soto, even Senator Joel Villanueva, na nagsasabi na, hindi, nasa Senado naman talaga yung kapangyarihan to try the impeachment case to issue a verdict. And so it is within their power to continue despite what the decision is made. So ayun. So for those who are using yung Supreme Court decision as the basis for their vote, ayun nga po, siguro I'd like to emphasize na hindi pa tapos yung usapan. No? So there's a motion for reconsideration. Baka magbago pa yung magiging decision ng Supreme Court. And ayun po, there is also an interpretation, I think, among some of our senators saying that it is within the Senate's power exclusive power to try and issue a verdict here. So yun po, I hope both of these are considered pag nagkabotohan na, which I believe will happen on Wednesday po.
Yes. Thank you very much, Kiko, for your time. That's Francis Aquino Dee, co-convenor of Tindig Pilipinas.
Thank you po.
And that's On Point. Join us again on Monday, 7:30 p.m. here on BNC, the Billionario News Channel. I'm Willard Cheng, sitting in for Pinky Webb. Thank you for watching.